Yeah, it's the Racer X Exhaust podcast brought to you by Yoshimura. 63 years of research and development with four-stroke exhaust systems. They've got that cool header pipe made of titanium that you can run on the new Works Edition Honda CRF 450R. It is designed exclusively to work with the mapping and head that are exclusive to that bike, so make your Works Edition even workser with Yoshimura. They did not give me that workser tag. I came up with that myself. Yep, checks in the mail. Also, RacerX main event, we talked about that the last few weeks. It is now complete. Congratulations to Chris Canning, who made a ton of cash by winning both the A classes up there. And he got to use that to pay off his old motorcycles, of which he doesn't even own anymore. Hashtag privateer life. I didn't get to make it myself. Flo came through town, not the one from the insurance commercials, but Hurricane Florence came through. I was grounded here in North Carolina. I got to go to Maine last year. I like going to Maine. I actually went there on my honeymoon. Didn't get to go there this year because we had a foot of rain. And thanks to engineers who do a great job with drainage in the suburbs these days, because we didn't have any flooding or anything in my neighborhood. But I couldn't make it to Maine. My apologies to everyone up there. Congrats to Chris Canning and also the Stewart family who runs MX207. It was a great race. Coming up next year. I have no idea if we're working with them next year. It's 51 weeks away, but we love it, so who knows? We'll probably be back. So that was cool. RacerXbrand.com, check that out. We've got t-shirts, patriotic stuff that you can wear to that big international race. What is that called? The Motocross of Nations? Yes, maybe you've heard of it. Coming up on October the 6th at Redbud. Be there. We're getting more international with this episode of our show. Jason Thomas, who normally stars with the Pulp MX network of shows and that silly Sunday night podcast that JT and I do with Mathis. Well, Mathis is moving over the week or so here. He didn't have his podcast stuff available, so JT said, can I call you to talk about my trip to Japan? 2 years in a row that Suzuki has sent someone from each of the major motocross press outlets to Japan to test a new motorcycle. This year, the 2019 RMZ 250. So JT will be on the line here in a minute to talk about the trip and the bike and Suzuki's recommitment to racing. But there was also some news this week that we had to discuss, which was the tragic passing of Tyler Evans. That is crazy. I mean, this is a very young man, not even 40 years old. We have now learned officially, since I recorded this podcast with JT, I'd heard many rumors and stories about what led to Tyler's passing, and now the LAPD has produced a report that says it was a domestic violence situation over the weekend. Domestic violence report against Tyler was filed on September 14th. Then on September 15th, the female victim that filed that report went to the police station, and apparently Tyler was close to her, and she told the officers he was there. The officers approached him, and Tyler Evans pulled out a gun and shot himself. This is not the type of news that we're used to reporting in the motocross industry. However, I've talked to some people that know Tyler very well. I'll mention it's Jeff Pastana, who was a NorCal pro, and Evans rode and trained with Pastana for a long, long time. He says really the gateway to all of this started with pain medication, and then it all spiraled from there. So in this episode of the podcast, JT and I are going to talk about pain meds. We'll talk a little bit about Tyler, but this is a bigger situation than it applies to any one person. Tyler Evans' tragic and sad passing. This is someone who's not even 40 years old. That just serves a reminder of how badly things can spiral out of control, and it starts with these pills. And JT has some stories from his racing days, both of himself and other riders he was very close to, how difficult it is to try to get off of this and how quickly the pain med addiction can kick in. So that's what we're going to approach on this episode of the podcast as well. Fascinating conversation. But first, this podcast. 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 Podcast, 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 podcast. Yeah, and there may or may not be a t-shirt coming themed to that song. So when you go to RacerXbrand.com, remember, you can get a 20% off discount. Type in exhaust in all capital letters. Do not type in pulp. Don't do it. Type in exhaust in all capital letters. Get 20% off. Give me credit for helping sell some merch. And keep your eyes open for a T-shirt that may or may not be coming soon. Now let's get to JT to talk about Japan. The cool side of the sport, we get to take these awesome international trips on new motorcycles, and the dark side of it as well. Okay, JT, you're back from Japan, second year in a row. So Suzuki, what is their deal? They really love this Japan thing. This is the third time they've done this, 2 years in a row. Is anyone else doing this? This is like Suzuki's thing now, man.
Yeah, I think it's really cool, honestly. Tak is the Suzuki North America president.
Yep.
And so I met him for the first time last year on this trip. And he's such a down-to-earth guy, and you almost forget what a big deal he is, right? To be in charge of such a big company, and he's so down-to-earth. He just feels like one of the guys. And I know for him, it's been really important for us to be in Japan and be around the Suzuki engineers that developed this motorcycle, and they were the inspiration for all of these changes. And to be able to talk to them right after you jump off the bike, and just in that culture and around, all the people that are responsible for it, I think that's really important to him versus just doing, a Southern California launch or whatever.
So he was over there too?
Yes, he was. So last year he was there every second of the trip. He was there at the factory with us and at the track and at every meal, and that was great. This year he had some meetings that conflicted, so he came to the bike presentation and he came to dinner with us and spent some time with us, but he had to leave the next morning and go back to Hamamatsu to have some meetings. So it was good to see him, but it was a little bit different of a trip for he and I anyway.
Okay, so this was a short one compared to, I got to go to Japan one time, and it's like they know that you're going to be also there to sightsee as well, going to a race. This time there wasn't nearly as much of that from what I understand.
It was a little different. Last year Ricky Carmichael came, which is anytime Ricky's in Japan is a big deal, especially for Suzuki. And there were a lot of media people there last year. Basically every publication, every major website had some sort of representative there. Large scope event, several trips to different factories. We went to the Japanese National at Sugo. That was basically the first thing we did when we arrived last year. So yeah, when you look at the scope of last year's event compared to this year was a little bit more intimate, a little bit more time with the engineers. We got to make a lot of bike changes and spend several hours really on the bike with no pressure, no time constraints or anything. So a little bit different outlook on the event. It was really more about riding the bike this year, where last year was more about, hey, how did we develop this brand new motorcycle and bring it to market?
Yeah, so that was what I heard from last year's. Did you have one 450 to share, and it was pre-production, versus you had your own bike this year? Is that how it worked?
Yeah, so last year we had one full Works 450 to share, and this was their actual race bike. So we were on a lap count. If you guys play baseball, it's like a pitch count. And they were really strict about it. Like the race team manager was there, and he was like, "Hey, he's done. Like, we need the bike." And they were very, very courteous, which is typical Japanese, but very, very strict. And so we got our few laps in on that bike just to see what. I think more than anything, it was they wanted to show what they were capable of building and give people a taste of a Works bike. But then we rode the older model a little bit after that just to compare back and forth. So it's a little bit strange, and I think it was really early in production. It was June of last year compared to September this year, so it was a little bit different time frame. But yes, this year was much, much different, where we each had our own motorcycle. There were 5 of us riding. We each had our own bike to, we could put 20 minutes on it or an hour on it, or 5 hours in some cases, depending on how much you wanted to ride that day.
Okay, JT, so where are you as a test rider? You've obviously raced forever. You've ridden put a lot of hours into a motorcycle. So where are you as a test rider? Like, as soon as you jump on it, do you immediately have a feel for like, ooh, it does this good, it does this bad? Are you at that point, or have you not ridden so much now, or stock bike's totally different for you? How does that work as soon as you hop on?
Well, I think I can get on and feel a lot of things that an average rider couldn't, just because of experience. I've ridden so many bikes on so many different levels, from factory bikes to stock and every brand in between. I can feel things pretty well, in my opinion. What's difficult for me is that I haven't ridden, like if I was a standard magazine guy, I would have ridden every brand every year for the last decade, right?
Right.
Well, for me, I haven't really done that. It's really been kind of a mismatch of bikes that I've ridden. So I've ridden, KTM 450s, Honda 450s, a Husky 450. So it's been kind of all over the place. Suzuki 450, obviously, as well last year. But I haven't gotten to sit down and have every brand of 250, especially right in front of me, and go through all of them to know exactly where that Suzuki fits in. That was my biggest challenge. In talking to the other media guys that were there, they certainly had more experience with saying, yeah, the Yamaha does this or the Honda does that, a little bit better or worse than this new Suzuki. So for me, it was a really neutral kind of test. Like I was going off of good or bad, not a good or bad comparatively to something else.
Yeah, and how often, when was the last time you rode one of the previous generation RMZ 250s?
I rode one last year. So
okay.
At the old style, I rode a year ago.
Okay.
But it's really hard to remember every little thing it did because I wasn't trying to test it. I wasn't making changes and this is bad, good, whatever. So it was a little weird with that. So really, I was just trying to get comfortable with the motorcycle and then just kind of do what a test rider does. Like, does it need to make changes? Is the bike balanced? How is the engine characteristic? Is it a little flat here or there? And then, the cool part, which I liked, was I was able to make changes to the bike, like significant changes, change the ECU coupling or change the ride height or change suspension settings pretty significantly and make it to suit me. Because let's say, for instance, Pat Foster was there, and he's, 6'1". So for what he needs a motorcycle to do and how it needs to be balanced is completely different for me. And we were able to take completely stock motorcycles and then adjust them to make them work for each, body type, riding style, speed level. So from where I started the first ride of the day to where I ended, we made pretty big improvements with very minimal changes, if that makes sense.
250Fs. This is a weird thing I've noticed for me. I feel like back in the day when we had two-strokes, the 250 two-stroke was the fastest bike, the better bike. But there were some dudes that are like, yeah, man, but I just love riding a 125. It's fun. It's rad. It's awesome. Maybe it's not the fastest, but it's cool. And some guys were better 125 riders than 250 riders. I feel like I never hear that of 250Fs. Dudes like, oh, I just love ringing a 250F out. So in general, do you like riding 250Fs or would you just prefer a 450 all the time?
I do like riding 250Fs. I didn't race one near as long as I did a 450. So it's a little weird as far as comfort level. I think I jump on a 450 and it feels more like home than a 250 does. Okay. I think that comment with the 125 it comes from a weight level, and they're so just maneuverable and light. And for me, it was always the forgiveness factor. I mean, you can always crash. Don't get me wrong, but you can get away with so much on a 125 because it handles so well and it's so light. It doesn't have any engine braking, so the chances of having a huge crash on a 125, I just feel like we're always a little bit lower. And 250Fs are kind of in that same vein. I just think the 125 is it makes everybody feel like they can ride a million miles an hour, even if you're going really slow. I think it's a combination of the sound and how aggressive you can be, and it's so light in the air you can kind of throw it around. I think it's just very confidence-inspiring for most people, and that's where that comes from.
Right. Okay. But you don't hate having to be like, oh, I got to ride a 250F all day. It's cool.
No, I think 250Fs are fun.
Yeah.
I don't think it is the perfect bike for me, my riding style. But as far as just a bike to go have fun on, it's hard not to have fun on a modern 250F. Fuel injected with mid 40 horsepower or above, I guess now.
Yeah.
They're a pretty kind of do it all bike, to be honest.
Okay, so is this bike any good? And I will help you here. I interviewed Ping back in July before this bike had been ridden yet, and he's like, dude, it's going to need some help. The old Suzuki is, and he did not mince words, slow. So is this bike feel faster than the old one?
Yeah, it's definitely faster. The numbers that they gave us it was 5% more horsepower, and the torque numbers were definitely higher. To me, when I really started thinking about, okay, what is this bike going to do in stock trim, and what can they do with it? I think they took a pretty big step forward in a lot of areas. They, upgraded the engine, added an injector that Kawasaki did last year, which helped a lot. They updated the frame, that they did swing arm, so they made all these sweeping upgrades that they needed for a while. But I think the most important aspect of all of this was that they now have a bike that is modernized, for a lack of a better word, that they can take and get serious about racing with. So from what I know, Suzuki with RM Army, they're serious about getting back involved in both amateur and professional racing. They signed Alex Martin, which was a big deal. He's been a top 3 series guy, both indoors and out, for quite a while. And they look at him as a potential race and series winner. I think in the past they've had a hard time getting guys to sign up, though. They, right or wrong, correct or incorrect, riders have had this perception that bike is not really ready to win. So I think with this new bike, not necessarily in stock trim is anybody going to go win a Supercross on. I don't think that's true for any bike. But now it's modern enough that a JGR or a HEP Suzuki or a Bar X Suzuki amateur team or whoever, they can take that motorcycle and make it into a race-winning level bike, where I just don't think in stock trim before it was quite capable.
Dude, this is the thing that Suzuki has been fighting for so long. Okay, so you can go back 2 years ago, and people were making fun of the brand. They're like, they never changed their bikes. It's the same RMZ 450 since 2009, which actually was not true. There were small changes year after year. Yep. They just didn't change the look, and maybe it wasn't as radical of a full redesign, but it changed. But at the same time, Ken Roczen was kicking everybody's ass on the bike outdoors. Roczen said, I'm leaving KTM because I want to ride a Suzuki. James Stewart said, I'm leaving JGR because I want to ride a Suzuki. They had dudes literally saying, I don't even care about the money. I just want to ride a Suzuki so bad. But at the same time, people were making fun of Suzuki for having old technology. It's like the brand image and the performance of the motorcycles were never combined. One was above the other. It's kind of unfortunate.
What's crazy is that, and I was talking to somebody about this today.
Yeah.
Suzuki, if you just take a stock Suzuki and you forget about trying to go racing, forget about, I'm not talking about James Stewart riding it. I'm just talking about your average Joe.
Yeah.
He gets onto a motorcycle and wants to go riding and have a good time. I think Suzuki does maybe the best job of that over the last, 10 years, of building a motorcycle that anybody can get on and it feels comfortable and it doesn't do anything wrong. It does everything pretty well. Mm-hmm. Okay, maybe it's not the fastest bike. Maybe it doesn't have the most updated electronics package. Maybe, they haven't changed the frame radically, or they haven't gotten lighter. There's a lot of things you could jump on and say, well, they haven't done this or that right. But if you're just talking about a motorcycle that you can buy and go have a good time on, that feels comfortable for a huge range of people, I think Suzuki has dominated that for a long time.
So not just competitive there, you're feeling for those guys, it might actually be more comfortable than a lot of the other brands.
Yeah, I've always felt that way. I raced Suzukis from 2009, or the end of 2009 until I retired in the end of beginning of 2013, and I felt like that was Suzuki's strong suit. We had to make pretty big engine improvements, modification-wise, but just chassis and just getting on a motorcycle and it feeling really balanced and easy to go fast on. I think Suzuki's done a great job of that. Their biggest challenges still, I think, are to find ways to battle the weight of the KTM and the Honda and the Husky. That they've kind of revolutionized what a 450 should really weigh, and I think Yamaha's fighting that battle as well.
Yep.
But I think Suzuki has that in their back pocket, and I've talked to a lot of consumers, people that work here at Western Power Sports. They buy Suzukis just because of that fact. They don't care about racing. They don't care if it has, if it's down a couple horsepower. They don't care. That's not important to them. What's important is having a motorcycle that when they get on top of it, it feels like home and it feels really comfortable and it's easy to ride, and they don't feel like it's going to pitch them off, randomly for when it's completely unexpected.
Okay, so what else did you learn over there? You said you got to talk to the actual engineers. So are there things that you were able to ask and get answers to that you've never had access before, unless you go over to something like this?
No, I thought it was interesting just to kind of live through their process of, they're constantly battling ways to shave weight versus dependability versus cost effectiveness too. So there's this algorithm or equation of making all of these things work together in the best fashion. Because sure, they could add. It's not like they don't know how to build electric start. They could add it at any point, but then it's too expensive or it weighs too much with the battery, and or do they want to keep the air fork, which everybody's screaming about having a spring fork?
Yeah.
Or do they want to keep the air fork or go to the spring fork because the spring fork is going to add weight as well? So there's all these checks and balances, and if we do this, well, then we give up over here, or it costs too much or weighs too much, or if we take weight out of this part of the engine, then we lose reliability, and there's just a million different factors in it, where I think a lot of consumers just sit back and look at, why did they add an electric start? That's stupid. Anybody could do that. Why did they not do it? Yeah, they're not idiots. They designed an incredible motorcycle, but there's a lot of external factors that they can't, they just haven't found the perfect solution just yet.
Yeah, it was funny. I feel like I've never heard that type of talk before, but I think when the rumors were coming around of what was that new 2017 Honda going to be like in the months before the bike was finally revealed, you kept hearing they're going to go back to a coil spring fork, but it won't have electric start, or they're going to do the electric start, but they're going to have to do the air fork. Because, the air fork is lighter and cheaper than the coil spring, and obviously the non-electric start is lighter and cheaper than the electric start. So to do both, and I think Kawasaki, they just went with electric start now too, but it took them a few more years to get it where they wanted, price and weight-wise. Yeah, you've never really heard of manufacturers having to make these decisions before, because for the most part, forever in the two-stroke days, you pretty much got what you got. They could change the porting, they could change the chassis, but the air fork, spring fork, the electric start, non-electric start, fuel injection, non-fuel injection, you never heard of these big decisions like yay or nay until more recently, I feel.
Yeah, and look at Honda. The first year it was an optional upgrade, right?
They didn't do it. Yeah, in the end, it didn't make the cut specifically for the standard bike, whatever you want to call it. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I think it's a universal problem.
Yep.
I think, like I said, I think that's their biggest challenge is finding a way to make it standard like Honda and KTM and Husky have done, and still check off these boxes of lightweight, keeping the price down relatively, and that's, to me, and they didn't really voice this so much, but you walk through these processes in this presentation with them, and you can see the writing is on the wall for that's what they kind of have to figure out next.
Okay, but Suzuki is not struggling. They are rebuilding. There is signs of strength there from what you saw.
Yeah, I mean, they're a super proud brand, and I have no doubts that they would like their unit sales to be up. I think that's true for any manufacturer. But I also know that they have a plan in place. I think Chris Wheeler's done a great job of reviving the Suzuki side with RM Army. And, I think the missing piece was this 250F. I think to get the guys they want, because if you really think about it, the guys that have realistic chances of winning a title, they don't have to settle. They're going to go with the best opportunity to win. Well, if you're bringing whether right or wrong, a perceived lesser stock bike to the table, they're not going to take that chance. They're not going to say, "Yeah, I'm going to put myself behind the eight ball to start with," when everybody else is beating down their door to sign them. So that was a pretty big hurdle they had to get past, and I think that's what this bike represents more than anything is an opportunity to now go get the guys they want and now go have a realistic shot of winning. Instead of before, where I think they were just hoping to do what they could do. I don't know this. I haven't talked to JGR or anything, but it seemed like in outdoors this year there wasn't this huge expectation level because they knew they weren't really ready yet. Like they just didn't have every piece of the puzzle yet on the 250 to go do that just yet. But I think that's going to change for 2019.
And there's actually more options than ever in that class. And I know four-strokes are expensive, and it's hard for teams to build these things. But even in the 125 days, you would have years where there were a couple teams that were good and there were a couple brands. I mean, there's legendary years of slow 125s. But if you look at these teams now, I mean, okay, if I run through Rockstar, Husky, Troy Lee KTM, obviously Pro Circuit Kawasaki, Geico Honda, and obviously Star Yamaha, no rider is going to say, nah, man, those bikes are too slow. So that's 5 huge teams. That's literally 20 rides. That if you have any leverage at all as a rider, you're like, well, I've already got one of 20 slots of fast bikes to pick from. So why would I have picked the one that, like you said, perceived as not being as good? There are more options than ever for fast 250 guys to find a good team. So that makes it even tougher to compete.
Yeah, and I think it's cyclical with some of this stuff. Honda released their brand new bike this year, and I quietly heard several times from guys that they were struggling with the engine. They needed more power, and the engine wasn't there yet. And then you flash forward to the end of the season, and R.J. Hampshire's winning races. So clearly they made strides with it, and it's just a time thing. So with this 2019 bike, I'm sure it's not going to be a rocket ship the first day they get it, but I think the bigger part of the equation is they have the pieces to build it now. They have, the second injector on the engine. They have a new cylinder head that's, all these pieces are moldable, where before I think they were just at the end of their rope with what they could do.
Do you have any insight on Chad Reed anymore, man? Can you do anything for Chad Reed on JGR? Any tea leaves you could read while you're over there? You got anything?
A little bit.
All right.
I was kind of dipping my toe in the water a little bit, and you never know how sensitive these things are or what they want to say or not say.
Yes.
But honestly, it just seemed like they wanted to do it at all costs. It was one of those things where we don't know how we're going to get there. We don't know where we're going to find budget, because they were pretty open with the fact that, their budget had long since been committed when this Reed possibility came up. Mm-hmm. So I think if they can find the money somehow, Suzuki's all in. Like, why would you not be, based on the results he's already given in one race? Of course, there's always the Chad Reed. If things aren't going well, he's certainly not scared to share his, share a piece of his mind on that either. So I think everybody across the industry is a little wary of that. But I think also Suzuki, they have a lot of equity with Chad, winning a championship in 2009. And I think at this point of the, quote-unquote comeback for Suzuki, I think it makes sense on a lot of fronts. They just got to find the way to financially make it work.
It makes sense on so many levels. And I know one of the big things is they have the Japanese come over here to North Carolina in September, and they do this big test. They did it last year. They did it again this year. And I'm sure they were thrilled to have Chad get to be a part of it this year because, like it or not, yes, as opinionated as he is, I mean, he probably blew their minds with the things that he was able to feel, some of the advice he was able to give. I mean, he's a great tool to have around for testing. But the only problem is, this is the exact same stuff we heard when he went back to Yamaha 3 years ago, and that already didn't work out once. So that's the one problem. He already was in a perfect position. Yamaha was relaunching their factory team. He had heritage. It seemed perfect. So that's the only problem. Maybe this time it'll work out.
Yeah, it's a little scary. I mean, that's Chad, right? For good or for bad, you're getting all of them.
Yes.
So there is that risk, but I really think when you look at their lineup, I think he fits in well because I look at the guys they have. Weston's great, Hill's great, but they don't have that marquee name. And whether Chad is ready to go win or not in 2019, that's anybody's guess. But his name resonates. For JGR going to sign a title sponsor or try to raise money, or Suzuki just marketing a brand new motorcycle or brand new effort, that name resonates with people across the industry. It doesn't matter if you're a casual fan or a diehard like we are. Everyone knows that name, and it carries weight. So I think just simply on that level, taking even the results out of it, there's a lot to it, marketability-wise.
Yep. Well, that's the way it should have worked with the Yamaha too. Maybe now. Maybe 3 years. Maybe he's maybe he's a more mature Chad Reed now. 33 wasn't enough. 36. Get it done. Okay, one other topic here. This Tyler Evans news, which is weird. No one's in the Tyler Evans circle at all. Well, I don't know if any of us were ever in the Tyler Evans circle even 15 years ago. But now we hear this news that pretty much Sunday, I think we all started hearing about. Tyler Evans is dead. But none of us, I mean, you and I and Mathis and everybody we're friends with, we're about as connected as it gets. No one had any connections. I didn't even know where to start trying to figure this out. Did you?
Yeah, I texted a few people that knew him. It's funny enough, Dennis Stapleton was in Japan with us, and he's been, in Tyler's. He's not really in a circle now because the circle was a little bit too tough to manage.
Yeah.
But he's known Tyler since, forever, right? We're all kind of the same age, Dennis, Tyler, and I, and they all are NorCal guys.
Mm-hmm.
So it's funny because we were just talking about him and sharing Tyler Evans stories in Japan, and
wow.
The last that Dennis knew, he was living in Tijuana, and he was trying to get some businesses up and going down there, but I think he was still in a pretty bad place with some of the challenges and addictions he faced. And none of that's, I can't basically prove that or anything. I'm just going off hearsay, but
yeah.
People I trust were saying he definitely faced some demons and was going through some tough times still.
Yeah, so we have our own NorCal connection, Nick McCabe, who works for us in a variety of ways. I don't think we even pay Nick McCabe. He just comes to the Nationals and helps. He does Where Are They Nows on our website. He just wants to be involved. So McCabe is like, hey, you need to call Jeff Pastana, who is another NorCal guy, I think tight with Dennis Stapleton. And he's like, Tyler lived at his house for like 10 years when Tyler was at his peak in Supercross. So call him. So I talked to him for a while yesterday, and he thinks that a lot of this started with, it starts with pain pills. We hear this over and over in not just motocross, but different sports, and honestly, just regular people, not even athletes. So he thinks whatever happened, it probably all started with the pills, and then all that leads to in your life years and years down the road. And Pastana was pretty outspoken. He's like, man, this sport is brutal. It's tough, especially when you're hurt and you feel the rush to have to get back on the track quickly because you don't have a ride or whatnot. And I'm sure, dude, you've heard stories, not just Tyler Evans, but anybody involving this. It's something people probably don't want to talk about, but you've heard.
Yeah, anybody who's been around the sport long enough will have this touch your life at some point, whether it's yourself or whether it's a friend or just someone you hear about at the track. It's pretty nasty when you have a sport that is so prone to injuries as motocross is, and pain medication is not really optional for a lot of surgeries. It's not like you can just gut out an arm surgery or a femur surgery or something. It's something I've dealt with, touches of it. I've seen a lot of my friends deal with, some successfully and some not successfully. But it's a nasty epidemic, and it's not just moto, but obviously it's prevalent in moto because it's so injury stricken. But man, if you just look at opioids, across the board, they have a pretty strong grip on the country on lots of different platforms and applications and reasons. But it's nasty, man. Tyler was just the latest victim of a long line of these guys that are still facing it. I mean, if you're tuned into moto, you don't have to search far to see guys that are being arrested in and out of jail and rehab every day.
Yeah. So the point he wanted to make is it's not. Don't focus just on Tyler Evans. Focus on he's just part of the sport, and this could happen to anybody. If you get the wrong injury at the wrong time and you're trying to come back quickly and you take too many pain pills, and then, man, you were telling me it does not take that long. The people that have not had long-term exposure to pain pills probably think it's like any other addiction, but apparently you're telling me it's a lot gnarlier the grip it has on you than most people probably realize.
Yeah, my little brushes with it were just from surgeries and stuff and having a lot of pain and having to basically be on it for, all day and all night. And then when the pain starts subsiding and you try to start coming down, it's no big deal. But then when you try to get off completely, then, you start to see side effects in your body's, neurologically and brain chemistry and lots of different things have been affected by, 24-hour dosages of these medications. So you have all kinds of weird effects, and I think it affects people differently. I think, everything from vomiting and sweating to, I dealt with this symptom called restless leg syndrome, which was really strange. It was just a weird kind of side effect from getting off of meds completely. I think everybody who has gone through several surgeries has dealt with this on some level, whether they even knew it or not, because I don't think it affects everybody the same way.
Yeah, you didn't know your restless leg syndrome was at first because it was a side effect of trying to get off the meds, right? You didn't even realize.
Yeah. No, I had no idea. I did not know that it was that, and then I did more of my, and even the doctors I spoke with didn't know. Then I finally had one doctor mention that it's possible, it's a possible side effect of pain meds because he knew I'd had surgery. And then I started kind of diving down that rabbit hole, and that's where I was like, oh man, all these things are making sense now, and that's when I kind of figured it out on my own. But yeah, I one of the things too is so many, I don't want to say victims, but riders that are injured or people that get hurt. I don't think they know, and I think that education is happening more and more, but I don't think many people knew the dangers of this stuff and just how it could get a grip on somebody, and then once it has a hold of you, it's hard for people to break away from that. And usually what happens in moto, and what I've seen time and time again, and happen, not to throw his name in here, but Nico Izzy, I think, is facing these battles right now. Is you go to pain pills, and then that morphs into some other opioid addiction, and then that goes down to something else, and then it has such a nasty spiral effect for all these guys. And it's one of those things where if you don't stop it in the early stages, the later stages get worse and worse and worse. And it's being documented. There's a lot of television out there and a lot of magazine articles and books, because this is, I would say in the last 10 years it's probably been the biggest epidemic across the country with drugs. It's just sad to see it touch so many, I'm going to say, good moto people. These were people that were brought up by good parents and around the races and people I was friends with, and it just, to see what it does to them, in the end, in the later stages, is unbelievable. They're not even the same people anymore.
When you were telling me you broke your leg, I remember you broke it at U.S. Open, right?
Yep.
Did you know, as soon as you were, say, out of surgery, and you're obviously, I had shoulder surgery, which wasn't as gnarly as your leg injury, but even I knew, you're not functioning. You need to have it. You absolutely had to have it. But did you know at that time, I've really got to be careful, or back in those days, was it actually not that known? Or were you aware the whole time, I got to try to get through this as quickly as possible?
No, back then it wasn't such a big deal. So that was the end of '08.
Yeah.
And obviously you didn't want to abuse them, but there wasn't this huge fear because
really?
I hadn't seen all of these other people go down this road. It was a pretty, if there was a problem out there, it was kept under wraps, or you just didn't hear about it as much. So I wasn't super worried about it. The pain started going away, so I was like, I don't need these anymore. And then that's when I started seeing the little weird stuff. And luckily for me, it wasn't life-altering where I just was like, I'm going to have to go get help or do anything. It was more than anything. It was just a nuisance for me and a real hard thing to get over, but not something that was going to ruin my life to get past. But I think that's, most people, they just need it for the pain. Like I said, with a lot of these surgeries, it's not like, well, yeah, that hurts, but I'm fine. No, you can't even function through the day without this medication. And in a lot of these severe injuries, that's a prolonged period, and I think that's where the real problem comes in, is in a prolonged period when you're 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks of, sometimes, a guy like Roxon blows my mind that you didn't hear anything about this stuff, because you look at how many surgeries he had over such a long period, and you imagine how much medication he had to ingest. That's a really hard thing to get past, I would assume anyway, just from my experiences. I've just seen where the prolonged periods are what gets people in trouble, because that becomes the new normal. And once their body tries to come off that normal, bad things start to go very quickly.
Yeah, but you had a routine this is a gnarly injury that most people don't have, a broken leg, but in motocross it's routine. It's not like it was botched or you needed to go back where there was a problem, right? The surgery went the way it was supposed to go.
Yep.
So the amount of pain med time you had was what it was normally supposed to be. It wasn't anything outrageous.
No, not at all.
And still you had this oddball side effect, even just from that. That is scary.
Yeah, and it's just, I think most people who have never dealt with anything like this or had any big injuries or whatever, I think they look at it as just a willpower thing. Like, oh yeah, he's not strong enough to stop taking them, or he doesn't want to stop taking them, or whatever, the perception is. But I think that if you do the research and you really start looking at what this medication does, from what I've read, it starts to change the chemistry makeup of your brain and starts to change some pathways, and it really changes you. So it's not even like you have this, I'll just stop today. Like there have been significant changes in your, the way your brain processes this stuff, that you need it, So when you see these crazy accusations and, people stealing from their own family and all this crazy stuff that goes on, you start to maybe understand a little bit more why that, man, they're almost powerless. Like they're not thinking on the same wavelength that they once were, because this stuff has such a powerful effect on them.
Yeah, another guy, we won't name names, but you said a whole weekend of just puking and just feeling absolutely horrible to try to get off of this. And
the people I've talked to, it's had a different effect on kind of everyone. The vomiting was a really bad one for someone I know.
Yep.
Another one of my friends, they just couldn't get away from it, had to go to rehab, and they're totally fine now. But they could not get away from it on their own. They basically had to go somewhere where it wasn't an option to get it, and they went through hell. As their body readjusted to not having this chemical. And that I don't think they were I think they were powerless to do it on their own, and until they got away from it, where it just was not, physically possible to have it, they weren't going to get off of it. So this stuff's for real. I don't have an answer for it. I think it's something most people kind of view as harmless. It's just like, oh yeah, this will help me not feel the pain. But you look at how many lives it's affected, and I think unfortunately a lot of these people just get forgotten about in the sport. But you start thinking about how many people, and I don't think many people know, but there are, I would say, at least 10 people that I know that have had significant problems with this stuff, and that's just me. That's just one person knowing in moto.
Yeah, I just wanted those examples because, again, to prove that it's not just a willpower thing. I didn't know this until you told me today. It's not just that you feel crummy. It's not like, hey, I wake up every morning and I drink a cup of coffee, and today I don't have one, and I feel horrible, or I have a headache or something. Like, it's making people vomit. It's making people have restless leg syndrome, which you didn't even realize was connected. Like, it's not just willpower. These are real physical, weirdo, difficult side effects. I had no idea. And this is, again, not people that were using them for years. You were on them for weeks. It's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you listen to testimonials and you read about stories, you look at the things people have done to try to get a pill or whatever.
Yeah.
That's not normal behavior. That's not something like, man, he must have really wanted. Like that's insane things and insane lengths that people are willing to go to.
Yeah.
They'll steal from their family. They will do anything it takes to get this stuff. That's not just like, oh man, he must really want that. That's so far beyond that. That's almost to where it's involuntary. Like they're not in a coherent state of mind to act that way. That's not normal behavior or normal rational decision making. So to me it's just proof of the grip it has on people. Like they're not at the steering wheel anymore. It's basically the easiest way. They're not making decisions based on what they want anymore. They have to have this. Their body is basically torturing them to have this, so they're willing to go to any length to get to basically stop the torture they're under.
Well, that's at least good to know. You're saying literally only 10 years ago, this wasn't even really a known, like, hey, you better be careful with this. So maybe just the fact that the word is at least starting to get out of try to do the bare minimum that you can, and it's going to be difficult, but you got to do it as quickly as possible. Maybe even that helps. That's crazy to think in 2008 you didn't even know, really.
Yeah, and there have been steps taken. I remember back then, basically if you went into a doctor and you had, any kind of pain or whatever, they would just write you a prescription. No problem, no questions asked, here you go, this will make you feel better.
Yeah.
That was before everyone knew the risks and knew, the repercussions. Now, all that stuff is monitored. Every doctor that writes a prescription for pain meds is documented, and they're only allowed to write so many prescriptions, and it's all watched very, very closely. But I would assume by the FDA, but it's because they understand that if there is a doctor who has bad intentions or has a problem himself or wants to make extra money, there is a huge, huge demand for it. Whether it's people who have an issue or just people looking to redistribute it to people who are desperate for it. It's watched a lot more closely now. Even in the little injuries I had later, and just talking to people who are still racing have had injuries, it's really tough to get any relief because it is monitored so closely now, and they're very aware of the dangers of it now compared to back then.
Okay, well, that's good to know. Two things. A, the people themselves know to be a little more careful, and B, the doctors have to be a little more careful. So at least that's some good news. But yeah, for riders of your generation, that's going to be tough because they didn't have those things in place back in the mid-2000s, or who even knows what was going on in the 90s. Man.
Yeah, it's just, it's not just moto. Football has been pretty publicized with this too. All the team doctors just hand them out, basically just here you go, here you go, here you go to manage pain. But they didn't understand either. There wasn't any research being done. There wasn't all this weren't these documented stories to share all these dangers. So, it's unfortunate all the damage that's been done, but, hopefully now that it is such a problem that we can kind of keep these kids away from it, and because the injuries aren't going to stop. That's the unfortunate truth. Kids are still going to get hurt. Riders are still going to get hurt just because of the nature of the sport. That's part of the sport, and everybody who rides motocross on some level is signing up for that. You just know it's possible. But the back end of that, all of these issues that no one really plans on or would ever sign up for, maybe we can start to prevent.
Cool. Yeah, that would be good. And from what I do know from talking to Jeff Pastana, it wasn't an OD situation. That's not what ultimately got Tyler Evans. But he does feel like the problems he got into, that was the gateway to it. And yeah, you hear those stories over and over. Nothing even to do with just motocross, all over the place. Like you said, you start doing things that don't make any sense because you're basically just turning into a monster when you're addicted. So, man, that's unfortunate. And he probably had no idea in, who knows, 2004 when he got knee surgery or something, that's what this was all going to lead to. It's terrible. Man.
Yeah, it's one thing leads to another. The addiction leads to, spending of money and not able to continue on with the life, whether you're working or racing or whatever, and then that leads to financial difficulties, and then that's desperation because you don't have the financial capability to support your addiction anymore, and then that leads to really, really bad things that, unfortunately sometimes end up, like Tyler did. And I would agree with Pastana that the root of this was, injuries and an addiction that led him to take his own life. I absolutely agree with that.
Yep. All right, JT. Glad you went to Japan. That was cool. You are never over travel, bro. You are never over it.
Japan trip to a really dark place, but that's all right. It's I think it's super relevant for this sport, man. There's a lot of people struggling with this. I think quietly, even more quietly than we would know, there are a lot of people that have struggled, that would never share that because it's not something that most people can understand. But, man, I guarantee you there are a lot of people that are going to listen to this. And Kenny Watson was doing a podcast with, a lot of guys that battled this in the past. And, we lost Brian Swink earlier this year. And I think this is just a very common problem that is kind of swept under the rug because people are embarrassed a lot of times to share that they need help. But I hate to see that because I've seen too many of my friends either lose their life or virtually lose their life because it's a shell of what it used to be.
Yeah, and what a spiral. Like I'm not in those shoes, so it's hard for me to say. But I would imagine if you end up also, like you said, now financially you're struggling. Now you've burned your family, so they're mad at you too. Like, if you put yourself in that sort of a hole all around, it's not going to put you in the position to also kick this horrible habit. Like, you're going to be depressed. You're going to be struggling. At that point, you're in the most prime condition ever to stay on drugs. So it's just a spiral of like, it's easier if you're a successful rider. And I had this conversation with my buddy Nick McCabe yesterday. We're like, hey, Stanton's going to have all these ex-Team USA guys come to Redbud. Now, if you're on Team USA, you're clearly had a pretty good career because that means 1 year you were one of the top 3 riders in the country. You don't really hear these types of gnarly stories with those riders at those levels. But it's probably 2 things happening at once. If you were injured a lot, you probably weren't having a good enough career. Unfortunately, the injuries probably prevented you from being that good. Second of all, if you have everything else going well, maybe it's a little bit easier to avoid this type of downward spiral. But if you're a fringe guy and everything's falling apart and you have this addiction at the same time, and then the addiction is making things fall apart even worse, dude, yeah, those are the stories you don't hear. Because we talk about guys like McGrath and Carmichael and all the time, but we don't talk about these dudes. It's bad. Yep.
Yeah, one of the toughest parts of that is, when people get desperate, the easiest and most accessible ways to get money or things to get money with, stealing or whatever, are those closest to them, right?
Yeah.
So once you burn them and you don't have anyone close to you, how are you ever going to have a support system to get help? Or
Yep.
how, those people to carry you through the dark times because you burned them already?
Yep.
And I've seen that personally play out, and it's just you don't have anybody, not anybody that truly cares anymore because they were the closest already and they were the first to get burned. And it's just it's a nasty spiral effect. I mean, there are just so many variables to it to get back to any normal semblance of life, man. I think that's why you see and hear the stories you do, is because it has such a nasty grip on people, and the things it's not even just, what it does to people, it's the things that it makes people do. I think that's the toughest part is it's not even like you're dealing with the same person anymore because that person you knew would never do the things that this person is doing now. Yeah, it's tough.
That's probably the proof right there. Like, if you think about any sane person doing these things, they wouldn't. So that's how you know that this is making people go nuts. It's making people go insane because they're doing insane things. There you go. Yep. All right, yeah, this probably won't be the last time that we hear about this subject in the headlines in our sport, and then every other also. That's the bad part. Good perspective, though. I had no idea. I just saw you break your leg and sit in a tough block at the U.S. Open, and then you're back racing.
Funny. Doc Bodner goes, "You all right?" And I said, "Well, my leg's broken, but otherwise we're good." And he's like, "What?" I'm like, "Yeah, my leg's broken. Let's get me out of here."
Yeah, I've told this story a million times, but I've never seen a dude be more in control of an injury. I could see that all playing, because at U.S. Open we used to announce we were literally like right on top of the track, as you know, you're like the stands were right next to the track, and I'm just looking down at you, and you're just like, "I'm good. I'm just gonna sit here. My leg's broken."
Yep.
But to think that it wasn't like you were sitting there writhing in agony, but even that ultimately, and again, you didn't have botched surgery, you didn't have to go back 3 or 4 times, and even that was enough to have a brush with this. Damn, that says it all right there, man.
Yep. Yeah, it's not going to stop. I mean, like we said, injuries are just a part of the game.
Yep.
So.
All right. Let that be a warning to all of y'all. Be careful. Anything else, JT? We good?
No, it's good. We're got some downtime. Got some couple weeks off here before racing kicks off again for at least a little bit. So we'll see. We'll see what Suzuki can do with these new motorcycles. I'm excited to see it. I'm kind of pulling for them just because I know how passionate they are. So I don't have a vested interest in it other than I like to see people who are trying. I like to see them do well. So I'll be pulling for them.
Yeah, and for the good of the sport in general, you want to hear companies are making a push and trying to get better as opposed to pulling back. So everybody should be rooting for that at the very least. It just sounds better that way. There you go. Yep. All right, JT. Thanks for the time, man. Thanks for going to Japan.
All right, guys.
Yep.
All right.
See ya. Okay, so that's JT on the 250 and the very deep topic of the painkillers in motocross, and you could probably just take JT or fill in the blank with any other rider that raced a decade plus like him, and I'm sure you can get some gnarly stories. It really starts to put it in perspective for us mere mortals who didn't have multiple surgeries, like rods being pounded into our legs to be able to get back on the racetrack. It's a lot different when you hear about it from that perspective. So I thank JT for that. And of course, we thank Yoshimura for backing the show. Check that out, yoshimura-rd.com. Everything you need for your 4-stroke exhaust, be it dirt bikes, street bikes, ATVs. They got that cool titanium header pipe designed exclusively for the CRF 450R Works Edition. And if you don't have the Works Edition Honda, well, they've got some really cool exhaust systems for that bike as well. And I bet you by the time you see one of these Suzuki RMZ 250s out at your local track or in your shop, there will be a really good Yoshimura exhaust pipe for that machine. Also, and RacerXbrand.com. That's where we've got our t-shirts, backpacks, hats, all kinds of cool Racer X branded accessories, and we'll give you 20% off. Just type in exhaust in all capital letters. That's our show this week. We'll be back with more next week. I got a lot of good stuff. Now that's the off season, I got a lot more time to plan these shows, and I think everybody else has more time to get on the phone because we're not all racing to the airport. So I'm really excited about one of the ones that I've got coming up. Ian Harrison, going to talk to him about his new role as team manager for Red Bull KTM. Yeah, spoiler alert, that's coming. And also Davey Coombs wants to get on the phone to talk some more history with Motocross of Nation. So stay tuned to those here on the Racer X Podcast Network, the Racer X Exhaust Podcast. Talk to you next week.